Webinar on the feedback literacy sessions. And today we are going to have a look at the activities to facilitate feedback literacy. It is 12 o'clock and I'm seeing that people are starting to come online. I'll give everybody about 2 minutes and then I'm sharing my screen and then we will start the presentation. Okay. Hi, so back again. I've put my camera on. Um, I'm not sure if everybody's okay if my camera is on, or do you prefer that I switch it off? Then at least you can see that I am a living person and that I'm not a robot speaking in the background. So thank you so much for joining us to our CHSE webinar series. And like I said, we are talking about today about the types of activities to facilitate feedback literacy. So in the previous webinar of last week, we looked at feedback literacy and Ashad presented a framework for student feedback literacy. And just to give you a recap, what feedback literate students are able to do is they understand and see the value of feedback processes as a route to improvement. They are developing the capability to make sound evaluative judgments, and they learn to manage their feelings in the process as they recognize the important step of taking action. So today we are going to look at the teacher feedback literacy. So there's a flip side of the coin. And the dimensions of the teacher feedback literacy, the interplay between the teacher feedback literacy and student feedback literacy, how we can support students to become skilled and proactive participants in the feedback process, as well as strategies to improve student engagement in the feedback. And we will end with some example activities that you can implement in your own teaching. So without further ado, let's start with the first part. So according to Carlos and Winston, teacher feedback literacy can be defined as the knowledge, expertise, and dispositions to design feedback processes in ways which enable student uptake of feedback and seed the development of student feedback literacy. So that speaks to what we are saying last week about what a student should be able to do if they are feedback literate. But what does it mean for us as the teachers? What literacies do we need to be able to facilitate that or development of the student literacy? So the teacher knowledge, expertise, and dispositions are enacted within disciplinary learning activities, which require appreciation of how effective feedback processes are managed. And that is being done within three dimensions. So the role of the teacher is in acting in productive feedback processes that can be described in the three dimensions, which are interrelated and have some overlap between them. So teachers with well-developed feedback literacy design learning and assessment environments in ways that facilitate effective feedback processes. So that speaks to the first dimension, which is the design dimension. The relational dimension is the attend sensitively to communicational and relational aspects of feedback with students. And then lastly, how do we manage compromises in how feedback practices and practicalities are handled? We will be unpacking these three dimensions a little bit further in the moving forward, but it is important to note that the use of technology is a feature of all three of these dimensions. And because technology is enabled in the feedback, or it's a key element in how we are practicing feedback, it's not considered as a dimension according to Carlos, but it is it's its own right as pedagogy rather than technology need to drive the feedback practices. So let's move on and having a look at the design dimension. So the design dimension is one of the most important teacher contributions to develop feedback literacy skills in students. Courses and assessments should be designed in ways that enable students to understand the purpose of feedback, to make judgments about the quality, and to implement feedback in the context of future tasks. So the focus of this dimension is to actively engage students in the feedback processes to promote student self-regulation. And within this domain, feedback literate teachers, therefore, needs to build in opportunities for students to learn the process of feedback. They should be showing how the students how to engage with the feedback and give also the student need to get opportunities to give feedback as well as act on the feedback. And it's not just a once-off engagement. It should be scaffolded, so the skill should be developed over time and not being seen as loose standing activities, but it should be meaningfully integrated between the various courses, within one course as well as across courses, so that students are able to transfer the skill and develop it over time. Supporting students in making judgments about their own work, but also able to provide meaningful peer feedback. And then we also need to design and consider the timing aspect, which will assist in closing the feedback loop and develop the required feedback behavior students need to become feedback literate. And then also using the technology appropriate. Are we all happy that we understand the design dimension? Just a thumbs up. Okay, good. So then we are moving on to the next dimension that we need to consider as teachers when we are developing feedback literacy in our students, which is the relational dimension, which has its focus solely embedded in the affective domain. And feedback literate teachers will show students what their role is within the feedback process and stress that it is not a one-way street. It's not feedback is not just coming from the lecturer or the teacher towards the student, but it is a conversational process that needs to happen between teachers and the student, but as well between students themselves. We also need to acknowledge that feedback processes can often invoke strong emotions or threatens the self-esteem and the confidence of students, which might impact on how the student respond to key messages and to learning in general. But if it's handled with sensitivity, students will become aware of their own emotions and will be able to reflect on how they respond, why they responded that way, and then will be able to come up with meaningful actions to take forward based on the feedback that they received. The last dimension, which is the pragmatic dimension, oh, my English is running out. We all know that in teaching, there are competing demands that impact the learning experiences we design. The time on task, what is the value of the learning engagement? Are we doing it for the sake of doing it? We don't have enough time to get through the content, so where should we have time to build in the feedback processes? So we need to think about what are all the demands, what are the issues that we need to take to consider when we are planning our learning activities. And we really need to be mindful of what is the learning outcomes and objectives that we want to achieve when we are designing and playing off or bargaining about or negotiating what will take precedence. So the feedback process should therefore be integrated meaningfully to be impactful and not just another add-on or another assignment to be completed, which brings us to the interplay between teacher feedback literacy and student feedback literacy. And there's a very nice process or a framework which was developed by Carlos and Winston in 2020, where they are showing the feedback, teacher feedback literacy at the top, and then at the bottom, the student feedback literacy. So basically, at the top describes the 3 dimensions, what we need to do. So the interplay between teacher feedback literacy and student feedback literacy implies mutual influence. The one has got to influence around the other one. And it is underpinned by principles of partnership and shared responsibilities. And the success of the literacies is reliant on the investment from both the student and the teacher. It cannot just be the one has got more autonomy than the other. So at the top, we have the teacher feedback literacy dimensions, which will aid in the developing of the feedback behaviors we want to see in our students, which is captured at the bottom. And developing these feedback literacy behaviors will have some benefits in our students, which include the self-confident students who take action, the students who have the ability to make evaluative judgments and manage effect through the appreciation of their role in the feedback process, which is then portrayed at the bottom, as I said. However, if you were noticed as a teacher, you've designed the activities and the students are not portraying the behaviors that you want them to have. So they show a lack of awareness of what the feedback means and the purpose of the feedback. They are not showing any cognizance of appropriate strategies for putting feedback into use or making use of the available opportunities to take their feedback forward. They perceived a lack of agency to implement strategies, or they lack of volition to engage and use the feedback. We then need to have a relook at our dimensions as to where was there a gap, what did we miss, where did we not engage with the students that we don't see the relevant behaviors we wanted them to see. So because through the enactment of the 3 dimensions, teachers guide the development of their students' feedback literacy, but the mutual benefit of feedback activities and processes can only materialize through communication and negotiation. As we see in the middle, the interplay between the one is not more important than the other. So what the teachers do impact the students, and what the students do determine a response from the teacher. So to understand what students do in feedback, Dawson et al. Created a tool that can be completed by students to give them some indication of their progress, which is asking them some reflective questions. So they've developed this feedback literacy behavior scale. Um, They looked at both Molly Belt and Henderson's frameworks of student feedback literacy, as well as Carlos and Belt, and they combined it into a set of broad behaviors that denote the enactment of feedback literacy. So this conceptual framework focuses on what students do in the feedback process and not what they receive. So it's physically focusing on what they are doing. So the 5 behaviors that we want to see is the first one is seek feedback information, which eliciting feedback information from a variety of sources, including their own notions of quality and examples of good work. So what sources are they looking at, and are they drawing on to receive feedback from? Making sense of information. It's processing, evaluating, and interpreting feedback information. The use of feedback information, putting feedback information into action to improve the quality of current and future work, and provide feedback information. It's considering the work of others and making comments or judgments about its quality. And then lastly, managing the effect, which is persisting in feedback processes despite the emotional challenges they pose. So Important to note that the second, third, fourth, and fifth one is what we've been talking about last week, and that was been mentioning in the beginning as well. But the additional one that might be missing from us, that we are never or that we are not always providing opportunities for students, is to give them the opportunity to seek feedback information. We are developing the skills. We are giving them opportunities to engage with the feedback. They might be giving peer evaluations. So those, they do practice those skills. But I'm not convinced from my side specifically, is that we are offering students the opportunity to find their own feedback, to state what it is that they want to receive feedback on. And I think that's an important point. So, which brings me then to the next point in our discussion, and I'm going very quickly through these slides, but there might be some time for questions and some ideas when we go through, is on how do we support students to become skilled and proactive participants in the feedback process. So, supporting students, there are some principles that we need to consider. The main thing is that whatever activities you are using, or whatever processes you are putting in place, that you are embedding in your teaching and learning, it has to create an opportunity for the students to do things. The only way that they will get involved is if they are doing, practicing, and not merely observing and receiving. So get them involved in the discussions so that they are able to make sense and help them to generate new insights, instead of just receiving the information. Activities should explicitly support students to make evaluative judgments. So give them an opportunity to make a judgment, to say, was it good, was it bad, was it indifferent, but also then justify as to why they considered it was good, bad, or indifference. Create an opportunity for them to discuss the feedback and not just receiving it, but they have to be able to negotiate, communicate if they agree, or challenge, or to ask questions as to how did you or how did the peer get to the point that they on the judgment that was being passed or the feedback that was being received. It's also good to also prepare them in giving them examples so that they can get familiar with the processes. So seeing model on others' behaviors to see how are they getting to a conclusion, and to evaluate their own way of doing things to get to the same conclusion. So that brings us to involve the students in the activities, encourage them to apply criteria, practice a criteria, and show their understanding of what we set aside as the criteria for the assessment or for the feedback that needs to be given. And then get them to participate and also generate feedback, not just for themselves, but also for their peers. So thinking about our comments on student work to ensure they take into account the effective domains so that feedback information can help them produce better work in the future. Whatever their level in the first place, sharing the feedback, giving experience with fellow assessors and students as a co-constructive practice. So these are some strategies to improve their engagement. So again, it's reinforcing, get them involved in their own and other assessments through peer discussions. They must provide commentary, and they need to review. And that's the only way that they will be able to gauge their own quality, or the quality of their feedback that they are providing, and it's also for them to see, are they progressing according to the set standards? So moving from emerging to achievement or mastery in the end. We talked earlier, or I mentioned earlier, the discussion point around the scaffolding. So have multiple opportunities and make sure that it's integrated, but start developing the skill with simple tasks, introducing some of the content and work with them to get until they are comfortable and confident to be able to give feedback more effectively. So increasingly make the tasks more challenging so that they are developing the skill and be able to engage with feedback more progressively. And then adopting approaches where students engage with assessment, task, and feedback across programs, experiences. So it's a coherent whole and not seen as separate events. So I've been repeating myself, and I hope that it will be reinforced in you that it is scaffolded. The student have to be part of the process, and the tasks must be becoming progressively more intricate and more difficult, so that they are developing the skills and they are growing and learning, becoming lifelong learners. Thank you, Shira. I see that you have made a comment that developing the ability to evaluate themselves accurately against your determined criteria sets up the basis for effective lifelong learning. And that is so true, which speaks to some strategies to for improving the student feedback. So how are they improving or how are they giving feedback? What can we do to get them to give meaningful feedback? So the first strategy that was highlighted in if you do a Google search, you will come up with, some people are calling it 5 strategies, and then there's 7 strategies, but I think this is quite meaningful. So the first strategy is speaking to explain the purpose of the feedback. Now, I'm going to ask maybe some interaction from you. What do you think? Why is that the first most important strategy that we need to put in place or think about? Anybody wants to share their idea? Why do you think to explain the purpose of the feedback is the most important strategy? Yes, Sue, thank you.
Sorry,
Your
I'm having trouble unmuting. I think one of our biggest problems is our students tend to come from an educational background where they only get negative feedback. So I think it's important for them to understand that this is different. They're going to get positive and negative feedback. It's going to be objective, and it's there to help them learn rather than criticize. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Anna. I see the student needs to know the intention, else they see it just as criticism. So it's basically the same. And it also sets, thank you, Lebogang, sets the tone and helps the student lower their defenses. So it's building rapport. So if they understand what the reason is and what the scope is, they will be able to navigate, and it will also guide them to come up with the action plan that they need to take forward. So it's very important to say what is the purpose and how it will be used so that they know how to interact with it. The next strategy that they say is that you can employ for improving student feedback is don't provide a grade with your feedback. And I think that is, why do you think is the reason why we say don't provide a grade with your feedback? I'm sure most of you are experiencing the same. You are spending 100 hours marking assignments and projects, and you are giving lots of feedback that is meaningful, that is supposed to guide the student in their thinking. And the student just want to know that the mark has been published, and as soon as the mark is published, they look at the mark, oh, I've done well, and they don't even look at the feedback that you've given them. So delaying publishing the grade together with your feedback forces the student then to engage with the feedback first and come up with what to make meaning out of it, to make sense of it before they move on. And then you can negotiate the mark as an alternative strategy. So yes, students are very grade orientated, and we are modeling it. We are modeling for them to look at the grade first and don't worry about what has been given. The third one, provide time in class for revising work. And this speaks to what do we value in our learning activities. And even the students, what do they value? Is it speed and accuracy, or is it depth and mastery? And I think we all know to what we are leaning towards. We've got a limited number of time, and we've got this large number of content to go through, and students are only worried about passing the test in the end. So depth and mastery is not the main focus. So if we want our students to make sense of the feedback, we need to block out time for them to engage with feedback, revise their work based on the feedback, and giving them time to meaningfully interact with the revising their work, changing or adapting what the product that they've produced, and then resubmit that. And that will guide the students to see the feedback and the opportunity to revise their work as a iterative process for improvement, and not just a punishment for getting things wrong. The fourth one, build bridges from feedback to revision. So this just basically means we need to start getting the students to understand that they need to use the feedback to be able to revise their work. So asking them specific questions. So what are you going to do with this feedback? So how are you going to look at your revising the work? What are you wanting to change? So giving them opportunities to or ask directed questions so that they start thinking as to how should I be using, making sense, and then plan an action plan based on the feedback that we've given or that I got. The fifth one speaks to use a mix of feedback tools. So if I may ask, what type of feedback are you familiar with and are you currently using? When are you using feedback? I know most of us are, if there's a quiz, then we will tell them it's a good answer, it's a bad answer. If they've written essays, then we will give them feedback to say, maybe look here or look there. Or thank you, Sue. There are some lecturers that are very good in giving a narrative feedback, but again, it is one directional. It's not always that the student is taking that feedback to heart. So if we are using a mix of feedback tools, so either have a discussion in class, giving verbal feedback and asking them then to reflect on it, using a narrative feedback and ask them to come up with a reflection on it so that you can see if they are integrating the feedback. So using a variety of feedbacks at different time points or intervals in your teaching and learning or the activities will get the student used to start thinking about what am I looking for, what do I need, and how do I react to it. So things are, like I said, verbal feedback, asking open-ended reflection questions that the student need to either think about, or they can share it, like a think, pair, share type of activity. They can do self-assessments where they are completing, evaluating themselves based on the rubric that you've got, that you are using, and so that they can also evaluate their progress from emerging to mastery against the set criteria, which can be followed then by a discussion to say who are on track, what can you do differently, so almost like a debriefing as part of the feedback process. The law, uh, the sixth strategy is um, varying the grouping. Now, we all know that feedback is happening everywhere. Um, it can be silent feedback by just looking at people's responses or their behaviors. It can be feedback on written feedback, formal feedback, so it can be informal or formal. But feedback is happening anywhere and all the time. And it's just not expert, we don't have to rely on the experts, which we see as the teachers, are not the only source of information. Informal feedback we can get from peers, and depending on the type of activity and the purpose of the feedback that we want them to engage with, will provide different insights and different viewpoints. So we need to expose them so that they are able to interact with different sources of feedback, so that they also can get familiar with who do I ask and what do I ask from whom, when it comes to seeking information or feedback information. And this, having this by making sure that they are engaging with peers, they are engaging with experts, they are engaging with a facilitator, they are engaging in different formats of feedback, will create a culture of collaboration, and sends the message that vulnerability and candor are valuable in a classroom setting or within your learning process, um, and that all the skills that you are using in making or in seeking the feedback and using the feedback is valuable in the learning process. So not just one way of getting feedback all the time, so making use of different sources and timings of feedback is important in the grouping. And then the last one is make it visible. Now, I was struggling with this one around how to make feedback visible. Um, and maybe some of you have been using this, but it's making the abstract idea of having it in your head or just thinking about it. They can take concrete steps. So we have to build it in our sessions or our learning experiences, concrete steps that they need to take to show how they've interpreted the feedback, what they found meaningful in the feedback, and what they will be taking forward. So it can be a concept map as to what are the next steps that they will be taking. It they can moving, drawing the a pathway, or having specific notes, an algorithm or something that they need to present, that it is visible for them to say, this is what I need to do, this is what I've been good at, so that it also built their confidence in how they are progressing through the course. So just as a final note on the strategies, is feedback isn't something that happens when things are over. And I think that this is something that we need to really take note for ourselves. Um, the more we can integrate feedback and revision into the projects and lessons, the better off our students will be, because they will have more ownership of the process, and they will increase in, it will help with their metacognition, in how they grow into lifelong learners, like Shira was saying, mentioning in the chat earlier. So before I'm coming to the activities, I'm going to pause. Let me just go back. Anybody has any comments on the strategies for improving? Anything that you want to add? Anything you want to say that I've missed that you think that it's also important to consider when we are developing students' ability to provide feedback? Happy? All good? Okay. We are going to have a big discussion afterwards because we are only halfway in the process. So when I was looking at some of the activities around what we can include, what type of activities can we include to facilitate the feedback literacy in our students, or developing, giving feedback in our students. One of the questions that was posed was, who is doing the thinking? So I want to ask you, in your current use of feedback strategies, or giving feedback to your students at the moment, who is doing the thinking in your activities? Is it you as the teacher or the lecturer, or is it the student? And I'm going to ask why. So if you decided on which one is doing the thinking, anybody wants to share in your current practice? And there's silence. Valentine.
Hi, Lizelle, Valentine.
Valentine, sorry.
Yes. So it feels in the current practice, usually, so for example, I gave feedback session on an MEQ that the students did. At that particular time, it mostly feels as though I'm doing the thinking because I'll be giving them feedback on on the scenario, on the questions that were asked. And based on their response, the reason I'm saying I'm doing the thinking is usually based on their response, it's all about the mark allocation. This was marked wrong, this was marked right, as opposed to the thought process of how did you get to the answer and why were you wrong? So it feels as though I'm also doing the thinking.
Thank you for being honest. It's not always easy to admit that we are working harder than our students in many instances. Neliswa.
Good afternoon. Am I audible?
Yes, now I can hear you.
I would say the thinking it's from both the students and the lecturer or the teacher. It could be in the classroom as you are delivering the lecture, you're having that discussion. Um, it could be test feedback. It could be an assignment. And the reason I'm saying it's from both, you as a lecturer, maybe you have been teaching, so you did probing before delivering that lecture because you want them to think about what you will be talking about, and you don't want a one-to-many communication. You want them to participate. Hence, you will start by probing. That way, you are forcing them to think. And also, in terms of feedback, what I usually do, even if I feel the question that I posed was not answered, I still dig that answer because I'm forcing them to think about that. So hence I'm saying it's both the teacher and the student. Thank you.
So I like what you were saying. So your activities that you are using for feedback is drawing on the reflective practice that forces them to start thinking about the feedback that they get. Anybody else that want to share? Nope. Okay. So some of the activities that was listed around developing the feedback skills in our students. The first one that comes up is worked examples. So basically that is, it is important for our students to engage with the assignment criteria. We all want our students to having the same understanding of what is expected from them. And most of the time our students are struggling to understand the rubric or interpreting or making sense of the assessment criteria. What is it that they need to show or produce to be able to meet the expectations for the assignment. So what you can do is ask them to, you can give them exemplars or exemplars from previous students' work, but then give it a justification or just have a discussion around why you have chosen those exemplars and why the feedback was given the way that the feedback was given, so that they can understand what is the parameters or how should they interpret the criteria, what is the goalposts. That will help them to understand the expectations, and then they are able to start assessing their own work against the exemplar. So making judgments around how did I perform my own work against that. You can also give examples. You can also start them, give them interim feedback, and I think most of us are doing that, giving them an opportunity to revise. So we're giving them feedback. They can draw on the feedback that they've got, and then they can interpret. But again, if they don't have a good understanding of the criteria, the feedback might be not making sense to them as to what should I be doing, how should I change it if they don't have an understanding of the criteria. So that should be sorted out first before they interact with the feedback. And then lastly, you can also maybe try and create an exemplar together. So if we have used, if this is the criteria, how would we construct and how we would make judgments? So what would be acceptable and what will be not? So developing that criteria, the rubric might be a good way of doing that. But also if you are working together with them, they are feeling included and they are feeling valued, that their voice is also heard, and they are able to make the judgments that are needed or that is appropriate to that. The next one, I think we are all familiar with peer feedback. Uh, Peer feedback, we are using the peer assessments, or even if they are doing presentations, we are asking different groups to give feedback. But if we are giving them a specific criteria and maybe make it in the beginning only one or two, so that they are focusing in depth and giving meaningful feedback around that, is a good way to start, because again we want depth over breadth. So rather give meaningful feedback over in one aspect than trying to give feedback across the board, because the students are not going to develop the skill of giving meaningful full feedback. Having peer feedback sessions as well also develop allow the skills of critically evaluating writing. So writing critically, identifying gaps and problems. And you can use, so it's sometimes easier to critique somebody else's work. So if they are able to identify the gaps and identify the problems in somebody else's work, it will be easier for them to start looking and referring back to their own work to see how can they apply their feedback on somebody else's work on their own work. So it's they develop a deeper understanding of the content and the assignment as itself. The next one, self-assessment during or before an assignment. This is a strategy that you can ask, it's again to allow them to give you specific requests. So you can ask them to, before you submit or together with your submission, you need to submit specific questions that you want to receive feedback on. It will also save time for the lecturer or whoever is doing the assessment, because then you can focus on that aspect that the student wants feedback on. It will also take allow the student to take ownership of their learning process, because they are identifying, they should have identified their own gaps. This is what they are struggling with, and therefore they want feedback on this specific aspect or criteria. You can then also use the various feedback or questions that the students are asking to give generalized feedback to the class or to the whole group, to say that these are the areas that people might have struggled with, and this is how you can correct. Another opportunity or method that you can use during or before is to ask is the SNOB analysis, SNOB, which speaks to they need to identify their own strengths, they need to identify their needs, opportunities and barriers, and then they can pose their questions, their feedback request based on that SNOB analysis. So either they want to have a reaffirmation of the strengths, so are they hitting the mark? Maybe they've got a specific need that they want specific assistance with. And then lastly, what are the opportunities, did they identify the opportunities as they go along? Another midway lesson strategy that you can have is let the students do, again, self-evaluation, or so start with the self-evaluation, then have a peer review, and then based on the feedback or the two evaluations, you can identify the gaps or the conflicting comments and only address those in marking or moderating. What's also a good system to use is called the traffic light, the yellow, green, and red light, or red, yellow, green, where they can identify aspects of I'm struggling with this with the red sticker, or highlighting it in red. I think I've missed the plot completely, or I don't have an understanding of this content topic. They can also then, for yellow, there is, you've got a basic understanding, but it's not, you still need to read a little bit more or do a little bit more work around it. And then lastly, the green is on par, on track, you are excelling. Or the student can say, I'm comfortable with this, I can move on. So that's a good way in the beginning to see it visually, to see as to what am I struggling with, what am I good at, or what are my strengths, and how can I continue. And it's also a good point for you as the lecturer, because you can then literally pick up on all the yellows and the reds to address that in a revision session with the class. Similarly, with the self-grading afterwards, evaluate themselves based upon on the agreed scoring rubric, and then so they mark themselves before you are marking them, and then there can be a discussion about where there is a conflict or a misunderstanding or a disagreement about should the mark be given or not. And it can also be done in group feedback to say why it like a debate to unpack the reason for why it should be given or why it's not relevant. Another strategy or an example of an activity is you are not giving the corrections. So you might indicate that this is wrong, or you don't think that it's the relevant, there's a misconception maybe. So you can highlight the misconceptions, but you are not telling them if it's right or wrong. And you ask them then to review and come up with action plans or write their own or peer evaluation. You mark it and come up with, why do you consider this is why was this highlighted? Was it a misconception? Was it incorrect? What do I need to do forward? What do I need to take further on this activity? So just by highlighting the mistakes, it puts it into the student's face to say that, okay, I need to look at this. I need to come up with what am I doing with this feedback. And then the last example is having conferences. And there's three types of conferences that you can consider. So there's feedback conferences, there's reflection conferences, and then mastery conferences, which is I will show a next slide to show you what they how that unpacks. But it's usually about a 20-minute interaction with students. So the feedback conference, the focus is on a targeted help. So they're getting help or feedback on specific information or areas that they need to look at. The students are asking the questions and seeking out specific feedback. The role of the teacher is then to answer questions with accuracy and precision and allow the student to practice the strategy under supervision. They can come up with further action plans, and that allows them to develop their own learning path. A reflection conference, it's guiding students towards self-reflection. So that's a way of asking them targeted questions. What do they need to think about? How do they engage with these questions to come up with improvement plans? And then the mastery is talk about progress towards specific standards. So what will they be doing? What can they be doing to move forward in the process? And I think that is the slot. Final words on feedback literacy, teacher feedback literacy, and why it is important for us to consider developing and guiding the students in developing the necessary skills and behaviors to be able to excel in your programs. Thank you. Questions, comments, concerns? Craig.
Hi, just a comment. What I really liked was the idea of providing feedback without a mark and then having them revise their work based on the feedback and then getting mark afterwards. Because what I've found is I've had a lot of peer review amongst my students, but they're not applying it. And I think even from this, in terms of research, if supervisors are giving feedback, they see the mark, they disappear, and that's the last they'll look at it. But I really like the idea of maybe applying, a short period whereby they can go back, actually physically apply, address those comments, and then giving the mark at the end. It's something that I want to consider doing because I do find that giving feedback doesn't always result in them actually applying it. And this may be a strategy that would work.
Oh, I'm glad I could inspire somebody to try something new. Thank you. That's very enlightening. I like that. Anybody else? Sue.
Thanks. Sue, I think most of you know we run an online program, so giving feedback has some limitations to it. But one of the things that I've recently discovered that works is I was previously asking students to give peer feedback, and they were all saying, oh, this is wonderful, and that ended it. But what I now do is I allocate a mark to the feedback on the feedback. So they have to then do it more, they take it much more seriously. And I give them criteria in a rubric just as anyone else for any other assessment, and that seems to work quite nicely. Thanks.
Thank you. So there are some of the strategies that you can, that speaks to this, so they can, if they have a good understanding of the parameters or the goalposts, they will be able to enact, and it's developing that skill. So that's also a useful way of knowing that I will be marked on how I've given feedback, and maybe a reflection exercise afterwards as well, for them to think about how did my feedback enable somebody else to move forward. And then you can mark the reflection rather than the feedback that they've given, to see if they have learned through the process as well. But that's, thank you, Sue. Valentine, you've got your, I think you had your hand up.
Nope, it was a clap.
Oh, was it a clap? Okay. Well, we've got 5 minutes to go. If there's no more questions, comments, or ideas, I say thank you for listening, and participating. I really appreciate that, and I hope you have, it sparked some ideas as to what you can include or add or do differently or adapt in your courses. Next week we will be looking at some of the tools in Ulwazi that you can use to create opportunities for students to engage with feedback, and not just the written, but also verbal and other forms of providing feedback, that we can develop their literacy skills in that process. So thank you for joining. Hope you have got a good afternoon, and we'll see you next week, same time, same place. And yeah, looking forward to seeing what you are doing. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.